Before we jump into this crazy story, let me know in the comments. Where in the world are you tuning in from? Maybe it's a sunny neighborhood in California, a bustling high-rise in Chicago, or a cozy farmhouse tucked away in Vermont. I love seeing just how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma manage to reach. The morning began with a kind of cold that seeps into your bones before you even step outside. A bitter frost clung to the window panes of my bedroom, tracing sharp patterns that caught the first glimmers of dawn. My alarm buzzed, though I was already awake. Years of working as an FBI agent had trained me to rise early, no matter how short the night before. I swung my legs out of bed, the hardwood floor icy beneath my feet, and moved through the motions of my morning routine. Coffee brewing, shower running, suit hanging neatly in the closet, waiting for me to slip into it before heading to the office. But this morning, I allowed myself a pause. A small ritual. The neighborhood bakery, just 2 blocks away. I had been going there for years, and the scent of fresh bread and pastries had always been worth the short detour before duty. My purple Rolls-Royce Phantom sat gleaming outside the garage, covered lightly in a dusting of powdery snow from the night storm. It wasn't just a car to me. It was a symbol of everything I had earned after decades of long hours, dangerous cases, and moments where my life had hung on a knife's edge. Driving it wasn't about showing off. It was about reminding myself that sacrifices meant something. I brushed the snow from the windshield with my gloved hand, the cold searing my skin even through the leather. The neighborhood was hushed under the weight of snow, rooftops sagging with white drifts, tree branches bowed like weary shoulders. When the Phantom's engine roared to life, the sound was a deep, steady growl that seemed to challenge the silence. I eased it down the slushy street, the tires crunching against patches of ice, headlights cutting through the dim winter haze. The bakery was warm, golden light spilling through the windows, a beacon against the dull gray outside. Inside, the smell was intoxicating, fresh croissants, cinnamon rolls, rich coffee. I lingered over breakfast, savoring the rare stillness. A few familiar faces nodded my way, neighbors bundled in heavy coats, their cheeks flushed red from the cold. For a brief while, life felt simple, normal. But simplicity never lasts, not in my line of work and not in this neighborhood. By the time I returned home, the sense of calm had already begun to fracture. I pulled into my driveway, the Rolls gliding smoothly over the salted pavement, and decided to park it directly in front of the garage rather than pulling it inside. I was pressed for time. My uniform and gear waited upstairs. I had barely 30 minutes to change and head back out to the bureau. It wasn't unusual for me to leave the car out for a short while. This was my property, my space. No one had the right to question it. Yet I knew, even before stepping out of the driver's seat, that leaving it there was exactly the moment they had been waiting for. Nancy and Julie, the sisters who had built reputations in this quiet neighborhood as the very embodiment of entitlement. They were both in their early 40s, lives centered around gossip, complaints, and an insatiable hunger for control over others. Neither had real authority, yet they wielded their voices like weapons, loud enough to make weaker neighbors yield to their constant harassment. I had dealt with them before. Petty remarks at community meetings, condescending lectures about how I set a bad example by owning a car too extravagant for a family neighborhood. They were relentless in their obsession with everyone else's business. What I didn't know, standing there with my keys in hand, was how far they were willing to go. The sound reached me first, the scrape of metal against pavement, then the sharp crunch of snow being piled high over and over. I turned, and there they were, each armed with a shovel, standing on opposite sides of my car. Nancy wore a heavy parka with fur trimming, her face red and gleaming with sweat despite the chill. Julie had bundled herself in a knitted sweater and scarf, jeans tucked into thick boots. Both of them were laughing, not the kind of laughter shared in good humor, but the cackling sound of people who believe they found power over someone else. They weren't just clearing snow. They were burying my rolls under it, shovelful after shovelful, packing thick layers onto the hood, the roof, the windshield. Chunks of ice slid from their shovels, scraping against the paint with a sickening sound that made my stomach tighten. At first, I thought I must be misinterpreting what I was seeing. Surely, no one would waste their time like this, turning a driveway into a battleground. But as the layers of snow rose, as the outline of the car began to blur into a frozen mound, reality sank in. They were doing it deliberately, destroying what they could not have, mocking what they did not understand. "Hey," I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. They paused only long enough to glance at me. Nancy smirked, shoving another heap of snow against the windshield. "Thought you'd never dig out of this one," she shouted, her tone gleeful. Julie chimed in, her words dripping with sarcasm. "Real men drive trucks, not purple toys. Maybe you should sell it and buy something useful." The anger flared inside me, but training kept it locked down. Years of interrogations, of facing liars and manipulators, had taught me to keep my temper hidden. I stepped closer, boots crunching through the snow, and fixed them with a steady gaze. "You need to stop. Right now." Nancy leaned on her shovel, breathing heavily. "Why should we? You think you're above the rest of us because you've got some fancy car and a badge? This isn't a private showroom. It's a neighborhood." Julie giggled beside her, tossing another pile onto the roof. "Besides, snow falls everywhere. We're just helping it along." My jaw clenched. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if it weren't for the deep scratches now etched into the Phantom's paint. I could already see the damage, streaks carved into the glossy purple surface like scars. I pulled out my phone, raising it in plain view, recording their actions. Their laughter faltered for a second, the awareness of being watched pricking at their bravado. But they didn't stop. If anything, they doubled down, shoveling harder, faster, daring me to react. Behind them, curtains shifted in neighboring houses. Faces peeked through windows, silent spectators to the unfolding spectacle. No one intervened. They never did when Nancy and Julie were involved. That was how the sisters thrived, on the inaction of others. I kept filming, my voice calm, almost detached. "This is harassment. This is property damage. Every second of it is being recorded." Julie sneered, her voice rising above the cold air. "Go ahead, Agent Man. Let's see who believes you. Everyone here already knows you think you're better than us. Maybe this little video will show them who you really are." The words slid off me like ice on steel. I knew what they were trying to do. Provoke me. Push me into losing control so they could twist the story in their favor. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Instead, I lowered the phone and stood still, watching them, my silence louder than any outburst. They wanted a fight. They wanted to win by dragging me down to their level. I refused. Still, the damage was done. My car was buried, almost unrecognizable beneath the weight of snow and ice. Every scrape of their shovels sent another spike of anger through me. But beneath that anger grew something else. A cold determination. They thought they had humiliated me. They thought they had won. But they hadn't counted on who I was, or what I was capable of when pushed. As they shoveled, laughing, boasting, reveling in their petty cruelty, I felt the decision settle inside me like a stone dropped into still water. This wasn't going to end with me yelling at them in a driveway. No, this was going to end with a reckoning. I turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked back toward the house, their voices chasing after me, sharp with mockery. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The plan was already forming. They wanted a battle. They were going to get one. And it would be the last time Nancy and Julie ever underestimated me. The silence inside my house felt deceptive. Beyond the walls, I could still hear the scrape of shovels, the grating crunch of ice on steel, and the cackling voices of Nancy and Julie as they mocked what they believed was a victory. My phone, still warm in my hand from recording, displayed the brief footage I had captured, enough to show their intent, their laughter, the deliberate destruction. But I knew this wasn't going to be solved by a simple call to the authorities. At least, not yet. Still, I had to try. My instincts demanded it. I dialed the non-emergency line, my voice steady, clipped, professional as I explained the situation. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled down the slushy street, tires spraying dirty snow to the sides. The officer who stepped out was a man I recognized, Dan Harper. Mid-40s, stocky, the kind of man who spent more time chatting with neighbors at the diner than writing reports. His expression tightened as soon as he saw Nancy and Julie, who rushed toward him theatrically, voices raised in mock outrage. "Officer, thank God you're here," Nancy began, pointing her shovel toward me as though it were a weapon. "This man left his car blocking the view of the street, a safety hazard. We were just trying to clear it before someone got hurt." Julie backed her up with wide-eyed sincerity, her scarf wrapped high around her face, as though she were a victim of the cold rather than an instigator. "You know how dangerous it is out here with all this snow. We were doing our civic duty." I stepped forward, phone raised. "You've got it backward, Dan. They're burying my car under ice, not clearing it. Look at the scratches. Look at the footage." Dan sighed, scratching the back of his neck. His eyes flicked to the rolls, now half submerged in its icy cocoon, and then back to the sisters, who hovered close to him like allies in a skirmish. "Look, I don't see anyone hurt. Snow falls everywhere. Could just be a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" My voice sharpened, and for the first time, I felt my patience stretch thin. "You're telling me the car buried in front of my own garage by two people with shovels in their hands is a misunderstanding?" Nancy laid a gloved hand on Dan's arm, her voice smooth with false sweetness. "Come on, officer. We all know how he is. Always so high and mighty, always lording that badge over us. This isn't about snow. It's about him thinking he's untouchable." Julie nodded vigorously. "Besides, he shouldn't park that ridiculous thing outside anyway. It's an eyesore. We're just trying to keep the neighborhood nice." Dan hesitated, then muttered something about this being a neighborly dispute, and suggested we all just calm down. The message was clear. He wasn't going to do anything. The sisters smirked as he drove away, their victory sealed in their minds. Nancy's voice carried across the snow-laden street, sharp enough to slice through the frozen air. "See? No one believes you. Not the cops, not the neighbors. You think that shiny car and that shiny badge make you special? They don't." Julie piled on with a laugh. "Better start shoveling. Agent man, looks like you're on your own." I stood still, watching them disappear into their house, leaving the rolls smothered beneath a blanket of snow and ice. My chest burned, but not from the cold. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something colder, harder. They had exposed themselves. They thought the game was over, but they had only played the opening move. The next morning, the car was worse. I had cleared some of the snow late at night, but by sunrise, it was buried again. This time, chunks of hardened ice had been packed into the wheel wells. Scratches marred the hood, long white streaks across the deep purple finish. Repairing it would cost thousands, and the sisters knew it. They strutted past my driveway with smug smiles, shovels slung over their shoulders like trophies of war. But their arrogance had given me clarity. If they thought they could twist the narrative, I would twist it harder. If they thought their lies would shield them, I would expose the truth so brightly that no excuse could survive. I began with evidence. Not just the footage from my phone, but from every angle I could secure. I visited neighbors quietly, explaining what had happened. Most of them had suffered some form of harassment from the sisters, false complaints, property damage, endless gossip. But none had dared confront them. When I offered to handle it, they agreed without hesitation. One by one, they gave me access to their security camera footage. I gathered hours of video showing the sisters marching across yards, shovels in hand, burying my car repeatedly. The picture was clear. This wasn't about snow. This was deliberate sabotage. I didn't confront them again. Not yet. Instead, I parked the rolls outside deliberately one more time, setting a stage with hidden cameras covering every inch of the property. The bait was irresistible, and as I expected, they couldn't stay away. Within an hour, they were back, bundled in winter gear, their laughter echoing off the houses as they shoveled with renewed energy. "Let's see how long it takes him to fix this mess," Julie jeered, slamming her shovel into a drift and tossing it over the hood. Nancy replied, louder, making sure her voice carried. "Oh, I'm sure he'll cry about it on his FBI report. Poor little agent with his toy car." Every word, every sneer, every crunch of ice against steel was captured in high definition. Their arrogance was their undoing. That night, I sat at my desk, headphones on, reviewing the footage. I cut it together into a seamless narrative. Their faces twisted with malice. Their voices dripping with contempt. The damage unmistakable. I didn't need to exaggerate. The truth spoke loudly enough. When the video was finished, I uploaded it anonymously. The caption was simple: "This is what entitlement looks like in my neighborhood." The response was immediate. Within hours, the video spread across social media. Comments poured in, strangers mocking the sisters, dubbing them the snow queens of suburbia. Memes emerged, their faces pasted onto icy villains from cartoons and movies. Neighbors began whispering. Their invulnerability was cracking. By the next day, the sisters were furious. They stormed across the street, banging on my door, demanding to know if I was behind it. I opened the door just enough to meet their eyes, saying nothing, letting their own panic answer the question for them. Their threats rang hollow. Their confidence had slipped. But I wasn't done. Exposure was only the beginning. I delivered the footage directly to the HOA, not as a complaint, but as undeniable proof. They had spent years bending rules and manipulating meetings, but now the board had no choice. The embarrassment of being caught harboring such behavior was too much. Fines were issued. Official warnings sent. The sisters had been untouchable for so long, but now the rules they twisted were closing in around them. Still, they clung to defiance. They stormed online, writing long posts about how they were being framed, how I was abusing my position. But their own words in the video betrayed them. Every excuse was shredded in the comments. No one believed them anymore. I watched all of this unfold from a distance, calm and deliberate. Every move I made was calculated. Every step designed not just to punish them, but to dismantle the shield of arrogance they had built around themselves. They wanted a battle. They had it. But this was no longer about shovels and snow. This was about humiliation. The neighborhood, once silent in the face of their bullying, began to shift. People whispered louder now, emboldened by their downfall. Children laughed at the memes. Adults avoided them in grocery store aisles. Their kingdom of intimidation was crumbling brick by brick. One evening, as I returned from work, I saw them standing at the end of my driveway, their eyes hollow, their voices sharp but brittle. "You think this is over?" Nancy hissed. "You think you can embarrass us like that and walk away?" Julie nodded beside her, though her hands trembled. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I only stepped closer, close enough that they could see the calm in my eyes, the absolute certainty. Then I walked past them, unlocking the Rolls, its engine rumbling to life. Their voices faded behind me. They had threatened me. But threats were empty when the world had already seen who they truly were. They didn't realize it yet, but they were standing on the edge of their own downfall. And I was more than willing to give them the final push. The snow had started again, soft flakes drifting down from the night sky, settling silently on the hood of the Rolls. This time, I didn't brush them off. I let them sit there, knowing the real storm was just beginning. The storm of exposure gathered strength faster than I could have anticipated. What began as a neighborhood spectacle became something larger, something the sisters couldn't contain. The video I had released burned across social media like a wildfire in dry grass. Every hour, the view count climbed. Strangers who had never set foot on our street were commenting as though they had lived here for years, dissecting every word Nancy and Julie shouted, mocking every shovel stroke, every exaggerated sneer. The laughter of the internet was cruel and relentless, and it stripped them of the one thing they prized most, control. For 2 days, they tried to fight back. They posted rambling defenses on the neighborhood Facebook group, insisting they were victims, that the footage was taken out of context. They claimed they were simply helping to clear snow, that my editing had made them look malicious. But the evidence was unshakable. Their own words betrayed them, captured cleanly by my cameras. Real men drive trucks. thought you'd never dig out. No amount of spin could scrub away the venom in those lines. Each excuse they posted was met with screenshots, with replays, with mocking gifs. Their own neighbors, people who had once tolerated their antics in silence, turned on them now, emboldened by the weight of proof. The HOA held an emergency meeting in the community hall, the kind usually reserved for discussions about lawn maintenance or budget reports. But that night the place was full, every chair occupied, the air buzzing with anticipation. The sisters sat at the front, their faces set in brittle defiance, their shovels propped beside them like props in a courtroom drama. The board reviewed the footage, the complaints, the testimonies from other neighbors who had long suffered in silence. The decision was swift. Fines for vandalism, official citations for harassment, a formal warning that any further incidents would lead to legal escalation. Nancy exploded, slamming her palm on the table, shouting about conspiracies and favoritism. Julie tried to cry, though the tears never came, her voice cracking theatrically as she accused everyone of betrayal. But their performances fell flat. The room no longer bent to their noise. The neighbors who once avoided their wrath now stared at them with thinly veiled disgust. For the first time in years, the sisters were powerless. The humiliation didn't stop there. The video spilled into local news outlets, then further. An evening talk show host played a clip during a segment about modern-day Karens, and their names became shorthand for entitlement. Children in the neighborhood made jokes, calling them the Snow Queens as they trudged past. Even their own families seemed to recoil, husbands avoiding eye contact, relatives skipping gatherings. Isolation closed around them like a frostbitten cage. But justice wasn't just about exposure. It had to cut deeper. Julie worked at a local office supply chain, a position she used to brag about as though she were an executive. When her employer saw the viral video, the decision was immediate. Unprofessional conduct reflecting poorly on the company was the phrase stamped on her termination notice. She tried to protest, but the damage was irreversible. Nancy, who prided herself on her standing at the Women's Social Club downtown, found herself quietly removed from the guest list of every event. Invitations that once arrived like clockwork ceased entirely. Her name had become poison. I kept my distance, watching the collapse unfold with measured calm. There was satisfaction in it, yes, but also clarity. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance being restored, about a community finally freed from the shadow of their noise. The Rolls-Royce bore its scars, streaks etched into the paint that no detailer could entirely erase, but I no longer saw them as blemishes. They were reminders, proof of what entitlement could provoke and what determination could overcome. Yet the sisters weren't finished. Even in defeat, they clung to their venom like addicts who could not let go of poison. One evening, as the last of the snow melted into slush along the curbs, I stepped outside to find them waiting at the edge of my driveway. Their expressions were hard, their voices low, stripped of the false charm they once wielded. "You think you won," Nancy said, her tone sharp as glass. "You humiliated us. You turned everyone against us. But this isn't over," Julie added, though her voice trembled. "You'll regret what you did. You'll see. We always come back." I stared at them, the cold night air wrapping around us, the faint hum of the Rolls idling behind me. Their threats sounded desperate now, empty shells of their former bravado. Still, I answered calmly, my words precise. "You've already lost. Not because of me. Because of who you chose to be." The world just saw the truth. They faltered, and for a fleeting second, I saw fear flicker behind their eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of irrelevance, fear of a life without the attention they craved. They turned sharply, retreating into the shadows of their house, their figures swallowed by the dim glow of the porch light. Days passed, then weeks. The snow melted fully, revealing green lawns and clean sidewalks. Neighbors walked by with smiles instead of wary glances. Children played freely again, no longer scolded by sharp voices from porches. The sisters remained, but their presence was hollow. Their windows stayed shuttered. Their driveway was empty, their shovels leaning unused against the garage wall. They had become ghosts in their own kingdom. One afternoon, I drove the Rolls slowly past their house, its engine humming, the sunlight catching the polished surface after a long, careful detailing. They peeked through the curtains, their faces pale and tight, watching as the car they had tried to bury gleamed brighter than ever. I rolled down the window, letting the hum carry into the still air, and spoke just loudly enough for them to hear. Looks like karma doesn't need snow to bury people. The curtain snapped shut. I parked back in my driveway, stepping out into the crisp air, the scent of thawing earth rising around me. My car stood as it always had, proud and immovable, a monument not to wealth, but to resilience. I thought of the scratches, the repairs, the effort it had taken to reclaim peace. And I realized the true victory wasn't in their humiliation. It was in knowing that entitlement, arrogance, cruelty, they all melt away eventually, exposed by their own weight. I closed my garage, the neighborhood quiet now, the sun dipping low on the horizon. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was the silence that followed, the absence of noise from those who once thrived on chaos. Yet as the light faded and the air grew colder, a thought lingered. People like Nancy and Julie didn't vanish entirely. They waited, simmering, searching for new angles, new opportunities to claw back the control they lost. Perhaps they had been buried by their own arrogance this time. But snow returns every winter, and with it, the risk of old patterns re-emerging. I glanced once more at their darkened windows, the faint movement of curtains betraying their watchful eyes. The battle was over, but the war between arrogance and accountability never truly ended. Somewhere in the shadows of tomorrow, another storm was already gathering. And when it came, I would be ready.